Hello and welcome to episode 33 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is April 3rd, 2017. I am Rollo McFlugel, and with me is Slappy Jones 2, and we are both at McFlugel.com. The show notes page for this episode is McFlugel.com/33. So let me send it right over to Slappy to introduce our episode topic.
Yeah, thank you, Rollo. Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. Today we have I think, a pretty good topic. We're going to talk about how to acquire property. Rollo currently has somewhat of a unique situation going on where he lives, and we thought it'd be a good idea to discuss ways to acquire property because people don't think about it. You know, we all know we have stuff, but how do you prove it's yours? And so, Rollo, why don't you tell the story?
So, believe it or not, this is not directly about a tractor, but I'm sure I'll talk about it. So,
It's 1971, right?
yeah, low boy, 154. So my neighbor to the north of me was an older guy. Lived in a dilapidated house. Like the roof was literally caving in. There were windows broken out. He's got, from what I've counted, at least 19 cars on his property and 2 tractors.
Is that being sarcastic?
No, I counted the other day. I counted 19 cars.
I don't want to get too far off track, but like, what kind of cars are we talking about?
There's everything from a late 80s model Chevy Suburban, some looks like Buicks, kind of like 80s, early 90s models, and then also some old pickup trucks, and
Nice.
It looks like a car from the 30s or something.
Wow.
And some of them are just completely wrapped in vines.
Well, they just rotted out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's got
Anyway,
and he's got 2 Farmall tractors
there you go.
that as soon as I
There you
bought the
go.
house, I've been looking at them.
So let me guess, you want to acquire them.
Basically.
Well, why don't you continue?
Obviously. So, and his property's all, the vines from his property, they're literally several inches thick, a lot of them. They're killing trees, and that's kind of a side thing. So his property's a mess, an old guy, and actually had some mental issues. So it was actually pretty sad and unfortunate what was going on. But I found he recently passed away. And from talking to some neighbors, I found out that he has no next of kin. And I assume he has no will. And so basically his property's being unoccupied right now. And what happens, I was looking it up, what happens in Pennsylvania is that they will look for, the government that is, will look for anyone who they can find as a family member, and they would give them the estate. And otherwise it would go to the state and they would somehow manage the estate. So I've been talking to, coworkers and friends about it, and it's funny, a lot of people say, "Oh, why don't you just go over and take it over?" I said, "Yeah, like homesteading, right?" They don't argue with me there. So I think people are kind of half joking about it, but also implicitly understand the homesteading principle and how to acquire property. So let's say, and I'm not going to do this because the state would come in and claim ownership of it, and they do have bigger guns than me. Let's say I did go over and start cleaning up his property and cutting down the trees, removing the vines, getting rid of the brush, cleaning the cars out, taking the tractors back to my house and rebuilding them, and taking care of his house, probably demoing the house because I don't see how that house is going to survive. How could anyone say that property wouldn't become mine, or anyone who decides to do that? And maybe if I was working on one part of the property and another neighbor came over and started working on another, who would say that the portion that I cleaned up wasn't mine and the portion that the other neighbor cleaned up wasn't his? So I think it demonstrates how that is a legitimate way to acquire property is through homesteading, through kind of mixing, doing something with it that no one else has done.
Yeah. So one way I like to explain homesteading, of course, we can talk about islands, which libertarians love to talk about. But one, we all own ourselves. Nobody owns you. Nobody has a right to you. Just like if I own a machine and I put some fabric through the machine and a t-shirt comes out, I own the t-shirt. And so I own myself, and I mix my labor with something that becomes mine, as long as it wasn't previously owned. Obviously, I can't steal. So the reason we use the island is because now we have a whole lot of land that is just not developed. So if Rollo and I are on an island and I build a house and he builds a house, pretty much anyone, no matter where you're from, is pretty much going to be like, all right, well, that's that guy's house. He built it. That's not really I don't think it's a very controversial thing.
No, it shouldn't be, because who, other than the person that built it, assuming that the land and the resources were previously unused or unowned. I hate to say unowned in this scenario because it kind of, I don't know if it defeats the purpose of the exercise, but let's say just previously unused, unoccupied land and resources. How could you say that that would be anyone else's other than the person who made it?
Right, and same if, say, on this island, after we built our little huts, we walk around and we find another house that's built, and we knock on the door and no one answers, and we come back a week later, we look around, it looks kind of old, kind of run down. We kind of look around for someone and nobody's there. Whoever was there has passed away. It would seem that that would be ours now had we decided to fix it up, keep it, use it for storage or whatever. That would be... I think not too many people would argue that. Now, say we took it over and then the guy brings his boat up and comes back and he says, hey, this was mine. Well, then it's his.
Right.
It was his, and didn't abandon it. Just like I've heard people say when we talk about abandoned property, well, in a stateless society, how would someone who, say the guy goes on vacation, you can't just say, oh, it's abandoned property, I'm going to take it now. Obviously, that person going away in that scenario would probably alert his neighbors and say, hey, I'm just going away for a month or 2 months or going to Florida for the winter. I'll be back.
And also, and people
Lock
understand what vacations are.
Yeah, and he would probably lock the doors and tell family members, swing by, check on the house, or, see what's going on, just like people do today.
Right, and let's say that situation happens or whatever. There's abandoned property and you're not sure if the actual owner exists anymore or what's going to become of it. It's a risk of going over and taking it. And if the actual owner,
pretty sure.
Right, and if the actual owner comes back and says this is mine, then it's his. And I'm sorry if you put in work in it and lost money over it, but you took something that wasn't yours. I don't know what to tell you other than you messed up. But on the other hand, if the guy never returns and you kind of homestead it and take it as your property, then you've got a decent reward out of that. So, like anything else, you got to do a cost benefit on it.
Now, yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. So, who wants to waste all their time and energy redoing a house when the guy comes back from vacation next week and it's his?
Right, and all of his neighbors are going to say, "Yeah, that's his.
It's his.
Get the heck out of it."
Yeah, exactly. And But okay, so kind of somewhat switching gears. We're talking about legitimate ways to acquire property. So, one of them being homesteading. What about the argument that the colonists stole the land from the Indians, and so now, therefore, it is illegitimate, and we should give it back to the Indians?
Sure. So, just to not to correct.
Okay, I was going to say first of all. Yeah, go ahead. No,
we both, Slappy and I both live on land that was not stolen from the Indians, which is nice because William Penn made treaties and bought the land. So I love when people say that to me, and it's like, oh, I don't actually live on stolen property, but I'll go along with your little scenario anyway, just to show that I can argue this point. But sure, say an Indian came, knocked on my door, and
for the sake of argument, let's say that literally there was Native American Indian civilization here, and on the land that you currently have, and the colonists came and literally stole it from them and kicked them out, because that did probably happen in some parts of the country.
Absolutely.
So let's say that's the case in Pennsylvania.
Right. So Right. He knocks on my door and says, this is actually my ancestors' land and I'm the rightful heir, and here's proof of it. And say that proof is really kind of undeniable. Then it's his land. I don't. It's,
Now, how can you say that? I'm kind of so.
Sure.
So what's I'm obviously trying to lead you, but what's the logic behind that? How, if that's his great grandfather's, how is that his land?
Well, because the land was stolen from his great grandfather, so all of the transfers of ownership thereafter were illegitimate.
Right. So it's like what we often talk about, Rollo and I, because this is what typically comes up in our conversations.
We're really cool, by the way.
Yeah. No, but the stolen car scenario, right? So say I steal my neighbor's car and I say, hey, Rollo, I got a great deal on a 2012 Camaro. $5,000, it's yours. You give me the $5,000, I give you the car. As far as you know, that was legitimate. Now my neighbor goes, you stop by the house and hey, that's my car, and has title, the proof, and whatever, and goes and shows it to you. It's now no longer your car, Rollo.
Right.
Now, so okay, I'm gonna pose the question that we would probably get. So what happens when someone's just stealing cars and selling them, and the owner never finds it?
Well, I don't know. Like, the owner never gets it back.
What happens today?
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, actually, I think if you look up the stats of recovered stolen cars, it's not very good.
Right.
Unless it's a joyride and they junk it or just leave it. But there is a market for stolen cars, and they ship them overseas. And you're gone. Bye.
Yeah, that's why you want to buy insurance.
Insurance on it, right?
But yeah, so if that situation happened and I bought this car from Slappy and his neighbor actually shows that he has the legitimate claim to it, then I would have to give the car back. Doesn't mean that I would then just be left with nothing. I could then sue Slappy and say, I want my $5,000 back because you defrauded me. When you're selling something to someone, as long as they don't say, oh, by the way, this stuff is stolen goods, then
as far as you know, it's legit.
Right. It's implied that you're buying something that they have the actual ownership of.
Right. You're not in the wrong unless you knew it was stolen or you asked me to steal or whatever. You knew it was stolen and you bought it, then you're wrong.
Right. And then you can, however I get my money back from you is, I don't know. But if I had no idea that the car was stolen, then you stole my money basically because you defrauded me.
Right. I frauded you. I stole the money. So I would be then required to give you back that money or make whole or give you money plus interest or plus whatever.
But let's say that there were 3 or 4 unwitting transactions that happened between me getting the car and you stealing it.
You bought a $5,000 Camaro and went, wow, I can turn around and sell this for 10 tomorrow.
Right.
I'm doing it. And
I do it, and then another guy does it. So at the end of the day, you can keep going back down the line and saying like, oh, you sold me a stolen good. I want my money back. But it would all go back to the original thief.
Right.
And so really what you could do is just kind of jump straight back. I'm sure it sounds complicated and convoluted, which I guess in maybe some crazy scenarios it might, but as long as you can trace back, and I'm sure all the people who legitimately thought that they were on the up and up with these deals would work together and be forthright and honest about it and say, hey, look,
Certainly. Look, I didn't know. Sorry.
Right.
Here it is. Here's your money back.
Yeah.
But, okay, so let's talk about some of the other ways to acquire property, or the only 2 other ways to acquire property.
Sure.
So we talked about homesteading. So you have this giant land mass. And I guess what we're really the point in the homesteading point, why we bring that up and why it's important, is that you can't stand on top of a mountain and say, everything from here to the Pacific Ocean is mine.
I was just going to bring that up.
Yes, because that's not a legitimate homestead. You didn't legitimately claim it. You can't just look at something and say it's yours. You have to somehow do something to make it yours. Whether you build a house, build a fence, you have your cattle grazing on it. It's clear that you've been doing that, and it wasn't on anyone else's land. And
That's
I think that was one of the issues out in Oregon a couple years back. Is the family had that ranch forever, and their cattle always grazed there. And one day the government said, "Well, now it's mine."
right.
Um,
And doing that would be like calling shotgun before you see the car.
yeah, exactly. You can't do that. That's a rule, and everyone knows that. But it is, and it's not legitimate to just say everything from the Atlantic to the Pacific is mine, and now anyone who lives there will pay me money,
Right.
or I throw them in jail.
So what you
That's
have
not-
to do is just call yourself a government and then say that the land is yours. That's one of the other two ways of acquiring property, right?
But that's not a legitimate claim.
But I don't know.
Yeah, it depends on how you want to define it.
it's a tangent.
Yeah,
that
it
we don't
depends on
have
how
to
you
get
want
on
to define
right
it.
now.
We don't have to do it, but we would just say that I don't see how in any world that's legitimate just to call yourself something else, and now you see it, so it's yours. But another way would be a voluntary transfer, right?
Mm-hmm.
We trade. We could trade dollars. We could trade services. We could trade cars.
But what makes that legitimate?
Because I own the dollars, the gold, the car that I earned or built myself. So I have the rights to that thing. I can now transfer those rights to you in return for something else, and that would be the selling. Because you legitimately own something and I legitimately own something, we now have the rights to those things. We can transfer those rights to someone else.
Right. And even if it's for goods or money for services, you own yourself, so therefore you can.
Exactly, you can pay. Like one thing, I used to work for a plumber when I was younger, and all the guys in the trades, they kind of knew each other, and all the time you would hear someone say, "Yeah, I'm putting in a new bathroom at Mike's house, and he's going to add an addition on or something like that." The carpenter will do something for him, and he'll do something for them. There's no cash exchanged.
Tax free.
Yeah, and I don't know. I have no clue if that's legal or not, because there's probably some way you have to be taxed for it. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know how it works.
That's probably the only reason it would be illegal is because you're not paying taxes on it.
Oh, of course. But the fact it doesn't change the fact that people kind of inherently understand these rules. And they're fine with making that trade to say, I'll redo your bathroom and you put an addition on the back of my house because I have plumbing skills and you have carpentry skills, and we can just trade them. People know that. They understand that. And not too many people would look at that and say, no, that's wrong.
Right.
Right? So, you could, when we talk about trading dollars are just another good, or gold or any currency is another good, just like your carpentry services.
Mm-hmm.
And you can trade them. But the third way to acquire property is pretty simple, is a gift. So I have certain skills. Say I'm a carpenter and I build a table. I could then give it to Rollo. Just give it to him. It was mine. I had the rights and I transferred it, and I didn't want anything in return.
I do need a dining room table, and actually a whole dining room set. So if anyone wants to gift their property to me, then by all means we can.
Yeah, I was going to tell you that this is just a hypothetical. I actually don't have any carpentry skills, so sorry.
Oh well. But and to go off on this a little bit more, someone might say, well, what about inheritance? Does this mean that's not a legitimate way? But I would say that inheritance should be pretty clearly seen as just another form of a gift.
Right. And while most people, and if you don't have a will, you should get one.
Yeah.
If you have any assets. But that's basically saying, say I put in my will that my will is everything unless she predeceases me, then I'll give it to Rollo. I put that in writing while I'm alive. I have witnesses see me sign it. We put it somewhere safe. Now, when I pass away, I transferred the rights to my stuff in this letter and put a time when it happens, and that triggering point is when I die. And that's just a gift.
Right.
Well, how would that work?
It already happens all the time.
It already happens, and it has happened for all of time. People
Exactly.
have always done that. So, anyway, those are the three ways to acquire property. You can homestead it, you can buy it, sell it. To acquire, you would have to buy, or it can be gifted to you.
And let us know if anyone out there listening has any situations where it seems like it's not a confused, but maybe a challenging issues for how property rights should be handled. We love to.
Right, and if we weren't explicit enough, just going to someone's house, paycheck, wallet, and taking something out of it is not a legitimate transfer of property.
But yeah, there's always scenarios that come up in not that I'm saying just make something up, because we can all make any scenario up that could basically beat any sort of system. But if you're aware of any actual situations going on, you say, hey, this is really tough, I don't know how to handle it, let us know. Throw in a comment, send us an email, or however you contact us with. We'll be happy to talk
it out. Yeah. So
because we're dorks and we think this stuff is really cool.
Yeah, we love this stuff and we like to talk about it. But anyway, I think that's a pretty. Do you have anything else to add on acquisition of property? Because I think we kind of covered it.
No, other than I hope I somehow acquire my neighbor's tractors.
Right, and you have 3 ways to do it. One of them's already out of the question. You can't gift it to you.
Right.
So you're either going to have to homestead it or buy it, and homesteading's probably not going to work. So maybe there's some way to buy it.
Yeah.
But maybe homesteading will work. I don't know.
The local government where I live is actually pretty loose as far as I know.
Yeah, so maybe they'll just say, yeah, take it. I doubt it, but you never know.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you have a free market story for this week?
I actually do, since we were talking about some stuff about how the things would function without the government, and you mentioned someone said like, oh, but how would garbage collection happen? I think we already talked about it as a free market solution. That I pay for my own garbage collection. So in case if that's one of the things that you think that the government has to do, I'm an example, and millions of other people are examples that that's not the case. But then I brought up like, oh, fire should be completely obvious on how it should be. Could be.
Wait. You're saying that people can put out fires without government involved?
Yes.
Okay. Well, tell me about this.
Well, I'll use an actual example that happened.
Now, before you go into the actual example, is that typically the response you get when you say fires can be handled privately? People usually say, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
No. I usually get called an idiot, and that's really what I just hear is 'cause I don't usually hear good arguments.
Yeah, so tell the story.
So as I mentioned, I don't know if on the podcast, but throughout the blog I mentioned I work in an oil refinery, and so we have our own fire department and emergency response because it's kind of a higher risk business than others, so we have the potential for fire, so it makes sense for us to be able to respond pretty quickly and put them out. And I don't know how long ago this was. This was probably at least a year ago. I saw black smoke coming up from somewhere and looking around, being like, I don't think that's coming from our refinery, and kind of going in the parking lot and looking. It was actually the business that was bordered us had a fire, and our fire department from the refinery went and put it out. And right when the fire was basically out, you heard the sirens from the local government fire department starting to go off when the fire was already put out. Well, I have no idea because I'm not in the fire department. I'm not privy to these things. I don't know if they called us and said, we got a fire, can you help us out? Or people in our company saw the fire and said, let's go put it out. There's a fire. We have the means to do it.
Now, I guess the devil's advocate type question, if it is even a devil advocate question, do you know if the other company compensated you for putting it out?
I don't know for sure, but I would be very surprised if they did. For one, I mean, Nozzle Nuggets love doing that kind of stuff, so it's...
Yeah, of course. That's why they do it. That's why they do the job. Not everyone wants to run into a fire.
Right.
It's not something a lot of people want to do, but some people do, and they provide a service, and good for them because we need them.
Well, and anyway, because if your neighbor's house caught on fire, or something was, not even fire, but something was going on at your neighbor's house that they either were unaware of happening or couldn't handle it by themselves, did you stand there at the property line and be like, well, that's your property and you're not going to pay me for it, so...
Of course not. But of course, now the argument we always hear, which I think is a stupid argument, is, well, what if they did?
Right.
All right, well, what if they did? Well, what if you're sitting here and we have government fire and your neighbor's house is on fire and they're not there and nobody calls the fire department?
Right.
So, whatever. You can make up all kinds of crazy scenarios. The bottom line is most people help each other. And if I saw someone breaking into my neighbor's house, I would do something.
Join them and steal stuff?
Probably.
Yeah.
No,
That's homesteading.
Well, if I could prevent it myself, I would. And if not, I would transfer that right to someone else.
Right.
Anyway, so because you have a private fire department, now you think poor people are going to have a private fire department. Great.
Yes. Because, where do poor people don't normally own a house? That may not be true. But a lot of them rent. And so it's in the owner of the apartment building complex's best interest to make sure that if there is a fire, that he can have it put out so his whole business isn't destroyed. And if you ever were to purchase your own house, chances are you want to buy homeowners insurance for it. And if you can't prove to your homeowners insurance company that you are not able to put a fire out if it happens, then either they will not sell you a policy or the policy will be extremely expensive for them because no insurance company ever wants to have to pay out. Because if they did that all the time, they wouldn't be in business. Or they would have to charge exorbitant prices.
Yeah, they have actuarial tables and all that, and they would change them if their claims rates went way up. But another real story is just right at the top of my street here. And I live in a suburban community. Your typical suburbs, the houses are, I can see both my neighbors. It's not like I have 10 acres of land here. It was right at the top of the street. It's probably about 8 houses up. Almost burnt to the ground. It basically pretty much did. And of course, they weren't home when it happened, and the neighbors did call the fire department. But the fire department probably would have saw the smoke. And this was a huge fire.
But a government fire department, so...
Yeah, well, it was, but they came and put it out, and if it was private, they would have came and put it out. So, but my point in this is you were talking about insurance companies, and people always have this bad taste in their mouth. But if you talk to any of my neighbors about how, and I know it was State Farm because they said it was State Farm, handled their claim, the people are thrilled with State Farm. I'm not lying; they're like over the top happy that State Farm put them up in a... Now, this was all on the policy. It's not like it was just out of the goodness of their heart. But these policies are relatively inexpensive because how often do houses burn down? Especially if you have things in your house to prevent a fire, like Rollo was talking about. And they put them up in a hotel, and the house is actually almost rebuilt, which is all paid for by State Farm. And they took care of everything. Two cars... It was really a big fire and really sad. 2 cars blew up, too, which were covered by insurance. And so the insurance companies took care of everything, and I don't see why that wouldn't happen in a free market. I think we would really heavily rely on these insurance companies, and their policies would be pretty good, and you'd be able to get what you pay for, essentially. And really, fire protection isn't that expensive because houses don't burn down all the time.
Right, and there's plenty of ways to prevent the fires from happening in the beginning. I don't want to turn this into another episode. Maybe we should have had this for it, but whatever.
Yeah.
Just a quick thing. The National Fire Protection Agency, which creates a lot of standards for how to, especially in industry and businesses, on how to, everything from cleanliness inside your building or your warehouse or whatever to fire exits and sprinklers. It's a private code because they realized, hey, businesses are burning down. So, and that's really expensive to have to rebuild your your entire, literally your physical business. So let's spend a little bit of money up front to make sure it doesn't happen.
Right. So if you want us to insure your building, you better have a sprinkler system in there. Otherwise, we're not going to insure it, because if it burns to the ground, we have to pay a lot.
Right.
Now,
So it was the free market that created fire protection, protection and prevention standards.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess we'll end it on that before we go into a whole new episode,
Yeah.
if we didn't already.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just split it in half there, and we'll have next week's episode.
We'll take next week off.
Yeah. Which is amazing. I mean, this is 33. We got 19 more before it's a year.
A full year. And maybe we'll start doing more than one a week one of these days, if we have enough stuff in our brains to talk about.
Yep. Slappy said that, not me, so don't
Yeah.
blame him when it's still one episode for a week.
No, we like what we're doing, and
Yeah,
we
it's
have
fun.
good episodes, and we thank you all for listening.
Yeah, we very much appreciate all of our listeners, and we would appreciate it even more if you would be so kind as to share with your friends and family and whomever you might think would be interested. So remember, the show notes page is mcflugel.com/33, where you can subscribe to the podcast on either iTunes or Stitcher. Also find links to listen to the episodes on YouTube, and also have links to follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. So with that, we thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, catch you next week. Peace.